I was born on an island whose beauty has always carried something deeper than what the eyes can see. Jamaica is not simply the country where I was born. It is the soil from which my story began. My mother is an African Jamaican woman, and my father is Jamaican Chinese. From the very beginning, two rich cultures met within me, shaping my identity long before I was old enough to understand what heritage meant. I was born in Portland, Port Antonio, in a town called Moortown, but the part of my birth story that has always made me laugh is the way my mother tells it. According to her, I was born by the riverside. My grandmother's house stood close beside the river, and the story passed down to me is that this was where I entered the world. Whenever my mother tells it, I imagine the sound of the water flowing nearby, the trees moving gently in the breeze, and the beauty of Portland surrounding that little house. There is something almost poetic about believing that my life began beside a Jamaican river. Before I knew anything about hardship, identity, family, or the journey ahead of me, the river was already flowing. It had been there long before I arrived, carrying its own stories through the land, and it continued flowing after I took my first breath. Perhaps that is why, when I think about where I came from, I do not picture a hospital room first. I picture my grandmother's home. I picture the riverside. I picture Portland, green, peaceful, and full of life. That is where my Jamaican story began. One of the earliest stories I remember being told about my life is that I left Portland when I was only 3 months old. Of course, I was far too young to remember it for myself, but it became one of those family stories that you hear so many times that you almost begin to see it in your own mind. I always laugh when I think about what the older folks used to say. They would tell me that in those days, you practically needed a passport to cross from one parish to another. Now, I honestly don't know if that was really true, or if it was just one of those colorful stories that grandparents and older relatives loved to tell. You know how they were. They had a way of telling stories that left you wondering, is this really how it happened? Or are they adding a little extra to make the story more interesting? Either way, those stories became part of my childhood, and they always make me smile. So, at the tender age of just 3 months old, my journey took me away from Portland. I may not remember the trip itself, but it was the beginning of another chapter in my life. I am the youngest of my father's 13 children, and the youngest of my mother's 5. Looking back now, I often laugh at how different life was then. Today, many families choose to have 1 or 2 children. I have Sarah, and she is my world. But back then, large families were simply a way of life. Sometimes I joke that people had enough children to start a football team. And to this day, I still wonder where everyone found the money to feed, clothe, and care for so many children. Yet, despite being the last of 13 on my father's side, I never felt like I lacked anything. I never felt forgotten or deprived. I had what I needed, and I grew up surrounded by a family story that was already rich long before I was born. Being the youngest meant I entered a family whose foundations had already been laid, and in many ways, I was able to benefit from the love, wisdom, and experiences of those who came before me. Sarai, when I think back to some of the happiest memories of my childhood, they almost always begin with summer holidays and Independence time. That was when we would pack up and make the long journey from Kingston back to Portland, to Morantown, to spend time with my grandmother before she eventually came to live with us in Kingston. I can remember these trips from the time I was about 8 years old, and even now, they bring a smile to my face. Back then, the journey felt like it lasted forever. Daddy would drive us through St. Thomas on our way to Portland, and every mile seemed to build the excitement a little more because we knew we were getting closer to Grandma. There was one place along the way that I will never forget. It was called See Me No More. Even today, just hearing that name takes me back. The road passed through such thick forest that the trees and lush vegetation stretched over it like a giant canopy. Even during the daytime, it became so dark that Daddy had to turn on the headlights. Looking through the windows, all you could see were shadows, towering trees, and the winding road disappearing ahead of us. As children, our hearts would beat a little faster every time we reached that spot. The older folks told us that it was called See Me No More because there were places where vehicles had gone over the precipice, and the drop was so deep they were never recovered. Now, I don't know if that story was actually true or if it was another one of those stories passed down from generation to generation. But when you're a child, you believe every word. Whether fact or folklore, it made that part of the journey feel mysterious, exciting, and just a little frightening. But once we made it through, the excitement returned. We knew we were getting close. Then we would reach Boston. To this day, I can still picture that beautiful stretch of coastline. My brothers, my sisters, and I would be huddled together in the back of Daddy's pickup. All 5 of us tucked under blankets, laughing, talking, and peeping out to catch glimpses of the sea. The closer we got to Boston Beach, the happier we became. There was something about seeing that beautiful blue water that made you know you were almost there. And there was one thing Daddy never failed to do. He never drove past Boston without stopping for jerk pork. That stop became part of the tradition. Before we continued on to my grandmother's house, we always stopped to see my Uncle Cecil. He owned a little restaurant there, and whenever he knew we were coming, he made sure food was waiting for us. There was something so comforting about knowing that family was expecting us before we even arrived. We would eat together, laugh together, and then continue the rest of the journey to my grandmother's home. Looking back now, I realize those trips were about so much more than traveling across the island. They were about family. They were about tradition. They were about belonging. Those long drives, the stories shared along the way, the laughter in the back of the pickup, the stop at Uncle Cecil's restaurant, and the anticipation of reaching my grandmother's house became some of the greatest treasures of my childhood. Those are the memories that still live in my heart whenever I think about Jamaica. Reaching Port Antonio never meant we had arrived. Not even close. Today, with the highways and the improved roads, the journey feels so much easier. But back then, reaching the town of Port Antonio simply meant another adventure was about to begin. From Port Antonio, it took almost another hour to get to Moortown, and that hour felt like the longest part of the trip. The roads were rough, really rough. The vehicle bounced from pothole to pothole, and as children, we would laugh one minute and then hold on for dear life the next. Sometimes it felt as though we were dropping into craters instead of potholes. The closer we got, the rougher the road became. But strangely enough, that only made us more excited, because we knew exactly what it meant. We were almost there. Then came the moment we waited for. As we drew closer to my grandmother's home, the first thing we would see was the little church on the left. Beside it was the graveyard. Now, let me tell you, as brave as we wanted to be, that graveyard always gave us goosebumps. The adults loved telling ghost stories, especially about that churchyard. And by the time we got there, our imaginations had already done the rest. I always hoped we would arrive early enough to leave before it started getting dark because, in my mind, every ghost story they told had to be true. Daddy would pull the pickup alongside the church, and before the engine was even fully switched off, we were already climbing out. The bridge. We would take off running toward it without a second thought. Looking back now, I wonder how fearless we really were, because it wasn't the kind of bridge children today would casually run across. Through the gaps, you could see the river flowing beneath, the very river my mother always told me I was born beside. For a split second, you would look down, your heart would race, and then you'd keep running, because on the other side of that bridge was one of my favorite places on earth, my grandmother's house. But if you think I was running straight to Grandma, you'd be wrong. Before I reached her house, there was one very important stop to make, Miss Maureen's little shop. Oh, that shop was paradise to us children. The first thing I wanted was what we called suck-suck. Today people might call it bag juice, but to us it was suck-suck. It was made with rich brown sugar, frozen inside little plastic bags. We'd bite a tiny hole in the corner and slowly suck the sweet, icy juice. On a hot Portland day, I don't think anything on earth tasted better. Then came the Milo. We thought we were so clever. We'd take the Milo powder, pour it into the middle of our hands, add condensed milk, roll it together with our fingers, and eat it like the greatest delicacy in the world. We honestly believed no one knew what we were doing. Of course, mothers always know. The day my mother found out, she was absolutely livid. Looking back now, I can laugh, but at the time, I knew I had been caught. And if all of that wasn't enough to make us feel like we had arrived in paradise, there was one more thing waiting for us. Miss Maureen's husband had built what we would now call a merry-go-round. There were no electric motors, no flashing lights, no loud music, just the ingenuity of a Jamaican man and a donkey. Yes, a real donkey. The donkey would walk in circles, turning the merry-go-round as we laughed until our sides hurt. To someone else, it may have looked simple, but to us it was magical. We didn't need a theme park. We didn't need fancy attractions. That little donkey-powered merry-go-round was our Disney World. As children, we didn't measure happiness by how expensive something was. We measured it by how much joy it brought us, and every single trip to Moortown filled my heart with a kind of joy that has stayed with me all these years. When I close my eyes today, I can still hear the laughter, still taste the sweetness of the suck-suck, still feel the bumps in the road, and still see that little donkey faithfully walking in circles, giving a group of excited children memories that would last a lifetime. Crossing over to my grandmother's house wasn't like arriving at someone's home today. It was simply a matter of crossing the little dirt road. There was no asphalt, no paved sidewalks, just a country track that had welcomed our family for generations. By the time we got there, Grandma had usually already seen us from Miss Maureen's shop. But that didn't matter. She still greeted us with the warmest hugs, the kind of hugs that only a grandmother can give. My Aunt Delia was usually there too, smiling from ear to ear, happy to see us. Before long, all the excitement of the long journey melted away because we were finally home. But we didn't stay in the house for very long. There was too much to explore. Almost as soon as we arrived, we'd head down toward the river. Right at the edge of the little track leading there stood a plum tree. It wasn't the kind of plum most people think of today. There were hog plums, juicy and tangy, and another variety we called coulis plums. We would pick them straight from the tree, sometimes gathering the ones that had just fallen, wiping them on our clothes as children always do, and eating them as we walked. Every bite tasted like childhood. The river bordered my grandmother's property for what seemed like forever. Her land stretched farther than my young eyes could imagine. Some of us would splash right into the river and walk along in the cool water. My sister Andrea wasn't having any of that. She preferred to stay on dry land because she was afraid of slipping on the rocks, while the rest of us happily wandered through the water without a care in the world. As we made our way farther along the property, it felt as though every few steps another fruit tree was waiting for us. There were Odahite apple trees, naseberry trees, and mamey trees. The mummy always fascinated me. To my young mind, it looked like Jamaica's version of a cantaloupe. But the flavor was richer, sweeter, and unlike anything else I had ever tasted. And then there were the cocoa trees. That is where I learned what real Jamaican chocolate tea tasted like. Grandma knew we were coming long before we arrived, so she had already picked the cocoa pods, dried the beans, roasted them, and grated them by hand. When she made chocolate tea, it wasn't the powdered drink people know today. This was the real thing. It was rich, fragrant, and so full of cocoa butter that a layer of oil floated gently on top. If you weren't careful, that hot oil would burn your mouth. She would serve it with crisp water crackers, and to this day, I don't think I've ever tasted chocolate tea quite like Grandma's. Sometimes we would crack open fresh cocoa pods ourselves, scooping out the sweet white pulp surrounding the beans and sucking on it as we walked. Those simple moments brought us so much happiness. You could walk and walk across my grandmother's land and never grow tired of discovering something new. Everywhere you looked, there was another fruit tree, another path, another memory waiting to be made. Nature wasn't something we visited. It surrounded us. It became our playground. But there was one part of the property that every child approached with just a little bit of fear. At the very end of the walk stood the outdoor latrine. Children today would probably laugh at the idea, but back then, that was simply how country life was. There was no electricity, no bathroom light, no flashlight waiting by the door. If you needed to use the bathroom at night, you carried a kerosene lamp or a lantern with you. I can still remember slowly opening that little wooden door, only to watch what felt like hundreds of enormous cockroaches scatter in every direction. Every single time my heart would start racing. I'd wonder if I could somehow wait until morning. But eventually, courage would win, and in I'd go, holding that lantern as tightly as I could. Looking back now, I laugh at how frightened I was. But as a little girl, it felt like one of the bravest things I ever had to do. Those walks across my grandmother's property weren't just walks. They were adventures. Every tree, every path, every fruit, every story, and even that frightening little latrine became part of the childhood that shaped me. When I think of Jamaica, I don't just think of a place on a map. I think of my grandmother's land, where every step held another memory, and every memory still feels like home. The journey back down the property was just as exciting as the walk up, but this time we almost always chose a different route. Instead of staying on the path, we walked through the river. Well, most of us did. My sister Andrea still preferred the safety of the riverbank. She wasn't taking any chances with slippery rocks, while the rest of us happily splashed through the cool water as if it were our own little playground. It was on those walks back that my sister Novelette taught me something I have never forgotten. She taught me how to catch buso. If you've never heard of buso, you're probably wondering what it is. Even today, I find it difficult to describe. It was a tiny black creature that clung to the rocks beneath the water. We would carefully lift the stones and gently pick them off one by one. It took patience and a good eye, and Novelette had mastered it. Before long, she had taught me too. Those little busos made one of the most delicious soups you could ever imagine. To this day, I still don't know if you can find them anywhere else in Jamaica quite like we did there in Portland, but I have never forgotten their taste. While Novelette and I searched for buso, my brother had another mission. He was catching crayfish. Not the shrimp most people think about today, but real river crayfish. They darted between the rocks, and somehow he always knew exactly where to find them. Before long, our buckets would begin to fill, and no matter how many people were gathering from the river that day, there always seemed to be enough for everyone. When we carried our catch back to Grandma's house, we already knew what was waiting. Daddy would prepare some of the crayfish with plenty of fresh scallion, onion, and hot pepper. There were no artificial seasonings, no bottled sauces, just fresh ingredients and the sweet flavor that came naturally from the crayfish themselves. It was spicy enough to make your nose run and your eyes water, but that never stopped us. If anything, we simply laughed, reached for another bite, and kept eating. The rest would become Grandma's famous crayfish soup. Even now, I can almost smell it simmering on the coal stove. As we continued making our way downstream, another beautiful sight always caught my attention. On the opposite side of the river were the women from the community washing clothes. To a child from Kingston, it seemed almost magical. There were no washing machines, no dryers, no electric appliances humming in the background. Instead, there were buckets, bars of soap, hard-working hands, and the river. The women would scrub the clothes against the washboards and rub the fabric together with such rhythm that the sound echoed across the water. They always joked that if your washing didn't make that sound, then your clothes weren't getting properly clean. After washing, they would spread the clothes across enormous sun-warmed rocks to dry. Some of those rocks seemed bigger than houses when I was little. Bed sheets, towels, dresses, shirts. Everything would be laid out across them under the warm Jamaican sunshine. But what stayed with me most wasn't the washing. It was the people. Everyone talked to everyone. Everyone laughed together. If one woman finished first, she would naturally begin helping someone else. Nobody seemed to be in a hurry. Nobody appeared too busy to stop and help another person. Because we had traveled from Kingston, everyone seemed excited to see us. As children, it almost felt as though we had arrived from another country. People called out to us, smiled, asked about our family, and welcomed us as though we belonged there just as much as they did. Looking back now, I honestly don't know if our generation will ever experience that kind of community again. There was a love, a kindness, and a togetherness that seemed so natural. It wasn't forced. It wasn't planned. It was simply the way people lived. As beautiful as the river was, eventually our attention shifted toward the road above. There stood Grandma. Even from a distance, we could see her waving her hands, calling us home. She had already prepared brunch for us, and if there was one thing you didn't do, it was keep your grandmother waiting. There were no microwaves in those days, no reheating food later. Grandma had cooked on her coal stove, and she wanted every one of us to sit down and enjoy that meal while it was fresh, hot, and filled with the love she had poured into preparing it. So we hurried out of the river, grabbed our buckets, laughed all the way back up the little path, and followed the sweetest invitation any grandchild could ever hear. Come, food ready. And somehow, those 3 simple words always sounded like home. If our visit happened during Independence, then Moortown became even more magical. There were 2 times during the year when the whole community seemed to come alive in a special way. One was Independence and the other was Heroes Weekend in October. But because we were on our summer holidays from school, Independence was the time we usually spent there, and I honestly don't know if I have ever experienced anything quite like it since. Once the washing was finished at the river, everyone naturally drifted toward the village gathering area. It wasn't something anyone announced. It was simply what the community did, and before long, food, glorious Jamaican food, began appearing from every direction. If there is one thing country people knew how to do, it was cook. One of the first things I always looked for was the famous hard dough bread that came all the way from the bakery in Port Antonio. The people from Moortown would bring it back fresh from town, and when that warm loaf arrived with real butter melting into every slice, nothing else mattered. No matter how full I thought I was, I suddenly found room for another meal. To this day, I still say that fresh hard dough bread with melting butter must have been what manna tasted like when God fed the Israelites in the wilderness. It was simply heavenly. Then there was Miss Maureen. Her little shop wasn't just a shop. It was a treasure chest. She always had grater, cake fresh coconut drops, and one of my absolute favorites, blue draws. Over the years, I've tried making blue draws for Sarah, hoping she could experience the taste I remembered from my childhood. But somehow, no matter how carefully I followed the recipe, it never tasted quite the same. Maybe it wasn't just the ingredients. Maybe it was the love that went into making it. Maybe it was the wood fire. Maybe it was the banana leaf it was wrapped in. Or maybe some flavors belong only to childhood. Whatever the reason, nothing has ever come close to Grandma's Moortown blue draws. Then came the chicken. Not supermarket chicken. Not frozen chicken. Real Jamaican yard fowl. We watched them catch it fresh, prepare it from beginning to end, and before long it was bubbling away in a rich brown stew with fresh herbs and seasoning. There was roasted breadfruit, roasted yam, roast saltfish, boiled dumplings, ground provisions. Everywhere you looked, another pot was cooking, another family was inviting someone to eat, another plate was being filled. Nobody counted portions. Nobody worried about whether there would be enough. Somehow, there was always enough, and just when you thought you couldn't possibly eat another bite, someone would say, "Come taste this." And somehow, you did. As wonderful as the food was, some of my favorite memories happened after the sun went down. There was no electricity, no television, no phones, no tablets, no distractions, just family. Grandma would light the kerosene lamp that hung on the veranda. I can still see the words written across it, "Home Sweet Home." Looking back now, I don't think there could have been a more fitting name. We would all gather together on the veranda while the cool, country breeze drifted through the night. Grandma would pour another cup of her rich homemade chocolate tea. Out came another slice of that warm, hard dough bread, and then the stories began. If you ever wanted to hear a proper Anansi story, my grandmother was the person to tell it. She didn't simply tell the stories, she became the characters. One moment she was Brer Anansi, with all his clever tricks and mischievous plans. The next moment she was Brer Tiger, roaring with confidence before Anansi outsmarted him once again. She changed her voice so effortlessly that, as children, we forgot we were listening to one person. In our minds, every character was sitting right there, on the veranda with us. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. We listened with wide eyes. We begged for one more story before bedtime. Those evenings taught me something that I only truly appreciate today. Entertainment didn't come from a screen. It came from people, from stories, from imagination, from family. Eventually, the time would come for us to leave. I always wished we could stay just one more day. But Daddy was an excellent driver, and he never minded traveling at night. Sometimes we wouldn't leave until after 9 o'clock because he wanted us to enjoy every possible minute with Grandma. And so, with full bellies, full hearts, and memories that would stay with me for a lifetime, we climbed back into Daddy's pickup and began the long journey home to Kingston, already counting the days until we could return to our little piece of heaven in Moortown once again.